I am going to hand over to Bruce and let him talk to you for the next 20 minutes or so.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for joining me here this afternoon or morning, wherever you are in the world. To echo Bruce's point, I do hope you're safe. I hope you're well. I hope you're keeping healthy. And as I think some of what I'm going to talk about will extend to, I hope that health is both physical and mental. That's really going to be quite central to the themes here. I think from the get-go, I'd just like to thank Prussia and Zest Global Events for putting this thing on. It's something I've been quite open and honest with her about, that seeing this as an initiative was a breath of fresh air. I think when you're looking at the chaos that's happening in the world, and certainly the impact it's having on business, it's one thing to look at that and think, right, I have to protect myself and others around me, and it's another to say, actually, no, we need to help people here. It really was quite humbling to see that email, and so I would really just like to commend you, applause, and well done. What I'm going to be talking about is something that I've struggled with for quite a long period of time. I won't necessarily give you my life story. It is something I can happily talk about if it's interest, but it feels a little bit of a bit of self-indulgence to really go into. And really, I'm going to talk about more the general topics of anxiety and how I've come to manage it. I think the big caveat I would put on everything I'm about to say, and something I'm very open and honest with, is that I can only give my perspective, and my perspective has been quite a broad one, suffering for so long in many different ways with many different ways that anxiety has flared up for me. However, one of the things that I've always tried to bear in mind with anything to do with mental health is it is an innately personal thing. It is very individualistic, and how you adapt and how you change within those environments will depend entirely on who you are as a person and what is the root cause of your anxiety or some of your mental health worries. I guess if there was one thing I would want everyone watching to bear in mind in the future, is this is not something to be ashamed of. There has been a great deal of work going on behind the scenes by a great many people in terms of making mental health issues a lot more visible, and I would commend those. It's only because of waves like that I became able to talk about my own struggles with anxiety and to begin to help others. I think the thing that I have learned throughout all of this is that it is often a hidden thing, and that people can take just a general feeling of unease and let it grow and fester, and not necessarily stop it early enough so that it morphs into something else. I have talked to so many people who have suffered from anxiety, and unless I'd asked the question, or unless I offered up my own story, they would never have told me that they were a similar sufferer. So from the start, what is anxiety? And it might be easy to say that it is a sense of fear. It is that knot in the pit of your stomach. It is a certainty that things are not going to turn out all right. Dread is quite a common feeling. But I think one of the nasty things about anxiety is it can be such that it pollutes your way of thinking. And whereas some people may quite rightly, when they think of anxiety, think of things like panic attacks, think of breathing into the brown paper bag is almost that media-based response. Sometimes it can be simple as always assuming things are going to turn out for the worst. It can be just one of those things that colors your thinking and poisons the relationships that you're in. What I would say in terms of how you need to think about your level of anxiety and whether you may need to treat a bit more seriously or begin to look into actually taking an active role in managing the feelings that you're having is really whether it affects the behaviors that you have. And so whereas for some people it might be quite an acute example, so something like agoraphobia, where someone is afraid to leave the house, obviously the behavior change there is I am afraid to leave the house, and therefore I won't leave the house. And so my anxiety is such that it's affecting the behavior that I'm showing the world I'm doing. However, it needn't be necessarily anything as grave and bottling in as that. I'll take an example of a period of my life when I was convinced through all my many different physical symptoms that there was something quite seriously wrong with me from a health perspective. And because of that, I didn't want to do any exercise, anything that could potentially get my heart rate above a certain threshold, because I was concerned for my life. And that was a genuine fear that was a result of an anxiety buildup in the background. So if you're watching this and you're perhaps wondering, yes, I feel anxious from time to time, but I don't have panic attacks. I'm not a sufferer of anxiety. I think my question back to you is, are you changing your behaviors in any way because of certain thoughts and feelings fluttering around in the back of your mind? And certainly in a time like this, when we're looking at being isolated, being separated from loved ones in some instances, being in high stress environments, it might be that your behaviors have changed much more than you think. Now, you can't talk about anxiety without talking about panic attacks. It is something that I've had many times. I know lots of sufferers have had many times. It is mercifully for me, thanks to the steps that I've taken in managing my anxiety, something I've not suffered for a very long time. But trust me when I say that I can remember that visceral fear that comes with a panic attack. And so if anxiety is that general feel of dread, that background fear, then a panic attack is this very real representation of it, where just something flips in your mind and you go from the day being relatively normal or a moment happening, and then this immediate sense of my life is about to end, I cannot breathe, I cannot escape, and all of those flight or flight responses just pressure on you. And it builds and builds and builds, and the level to which it builds for some people is higher than others, and eventually it passes. But in that moment, you're often incapable of doing anything other than just trying to process and get through the next few moments. They are not fun. I think it's a fair assessment, and they can really affect the things that you do. And I know for a lot of people, they are the first thing that begins to change their behaviors. So, for example, I had a panic attack once when I was cooking spaghetti bolognese, of all things. Fairly innocuous thing to do, but I was just cooking it in the kitchen, and then I just got a sense of, oh, I can't breathe. And the thought was as simple and as powerful as that. And as I began to cook, I had to stop. I had to just sit down. I had a head in my hands, and I was trying to process it. And the moment eventually passed, as they always did. But then the next time I was in the kitchen, I remember feeling that exact same sense of fear, that almost that panic building, and that thought process of, oh, well, it happened once in the kitchen, won't it happen again? And that can be often the seed that begins to change these behaviors. Now, fortunately, I was deep into managing my anxiety at this point. I could begin to deal with those emotions and continue to cook and be in the kitchen without any issue. But I can see for a lot of people, these moments can become quite impactful in how they live their lives. So these two things really go hand in hand. Anxiety and panic attacks, very much linked. There is also on a third tranche in terms of what can impact all these things, depression. However, it's not necessarily a certainty. Although anxiety and depression are often linked, I know a lot of sufferers of depression that do not have anxiety, a lot of sufferers of anxiety that do not have depression. It's not going to be a subject of my talk, but it is something to bear in mind as we talk about mental health. I think throughout this idea of anxiety, what I would say is it's far more common than people think. And a large reason why it is so common is because people do not want to talk about it. And when I think of why they do not, I think one of the tricks of anxiety is that it makes you feel like you are the only person in the world that is suffering from it, in that you will look at people saying that they are anxious or people that say they suffer from anxiety, but your brain goes to a point of saying, no, it's not that. Nobody has ever had my type of anxiety before, therefore there is no one I can turn to get help and advice. And it begins to build upon this idea of you being a burden and not necessarily wanting to open up. And if you say to someone, hey, I suffer from anxiety, I might struggle to do X, Y, and Z, that they will react quite negatively to that. They won't be supportive. Whereas, for example, if we were to say to someone, hey, I've broken my arm, I can't do these things for a moment, we wouldn't necessarily have that same baggage that accompanies that. So the idea of mental health writ large, but anxiety in particular being this thing that you do not want to necessarily offload onto people, can be one of those things that helps it build in the background and actually make it quite tricky to combat. So that's very much a primer on anxiety in terms of what it is and how it exists in the world. If you're listening to that and you think, hey, I can recognize something of myself in there, I can recognize perhaps past instances where I've behaved like that, well then, let's talk about understanding your anxiety. And I think first and foremost is to understand that you are not alone. It's certainly something that that I felt early on in terms of my personal view of anxiety and how I suffered with it, it is very much a thing that is just, there will be other people, other sufferers just like you, from similar backgrounds, from different backgrounds, whatever you're feeling and however it's manifesting, you are not alone in this. And once you begin to understand and accept that, that is really the first step to being able to manage it. So if you're out there, if some of that rings true and you're thinking, okay, but it's similar, but it's not quite what I have, no matter what kind of anxiety you're showing, whether it's someone like me who has generalized anxiety disorder, which is basically a background level of anxiety that is always there, or whether you have particular phobias that make your anxiety flare, or whether there are just things that you really, even when you're thinking about, give you a quite visceral reaction. There is someone with those same triggers, someone who feels like you, someone who thinks like you. And that is a good, empowering thing. It means, one, you're not alone, and it means that there are pathways to help no matter what situation you're in. I do want to talk about physical symptoms, because whereas a lot of anxiety is thought of as this thing that only exists in the mind, the truth is that if you are if you suffer from anxiety quite badly, you will have a number of physical symptoms which can be good cues. So sweating is an obvious one. It's that fear response, tightness of the throat, tightness in your chest. I've been appreciating that we're living in a COVID-19 world at the moment, and certainly I know a lot of people who have anxiety who kind of got in touch with me. I was like, hey, I'm feeling tightness in my chest. Is it a virus or am I just anxious? And most of the time it was just anxiety, but you hear about these symptoms and then you begin to manifest them in yourself. If you're one of those people that is constantly needing to be in movement, maybe you tap your leg, maybe you feel like you have this extra energy that you need to burn off. Maybe it's tension headaches and just this idea that you're staring too hard at things, or that you're concentrating too much. It is really, for me, when I talk about physical symptoms of anxiety, is this idea of tightening yourself up to bottling up feelings and building up the stress and being unable to release it in a healthy and productive way, and that then manifests these symptoms. It's why, for a lot of people, the idea of physical exercise helps. Just doing some exercise helps. Now, not everyone, again, I come back to that same caveat, but if you're one of those people that has boundless energy, and certainly this idea of an aspect of I can't breathe, doing exercise is a great way of shaking your body out of that and giving some good hormonal release in order to manage that going forward. What I want to talk about in terms of understanding anxiety and understanding your particular form of anxiety, and something that quite helped me, was to understand that your conscious self, are actually two brains. And when we think of who we are, we think of our conscious mind and the thoughts that we have, our dreams, our aspirations, who we are as people. And that is obviously a huge part. It's that prefrontal cortex that makes us us. But there is also an unconscious mind, a primal mind, that is kind of, some people call it the lizard brain. I think that's quite a useful analogy, which is basically the part of your brain which is on the lookout for danger, which is more automatic. It's that part of your brain that when you see a flicker in the corner of your eye, you kind of turn to and like, oh, what's that? It notices things that your conscious mind does not. And certainly in some of the preliminary research, and again, that same caveat is never trust anyone offering easy answers or concrete research, certainly. But that anxious side of you is often triggered first by the unconscious mind, not necessarily the conscious one. And that unconscious mind is a very good pattern recognizer. And I can talk about myself in terms of, I can recall times where I was just sat on the couch watching a film, watching TV with my wife, with my kid, relatively happy. And then suddenly I just get this sense of dread and panic and that tightening in the chest and all those nasty things. And you begin to think, well, why is this happening? I wasn't thinking of anything anxious. I wasn't doing anything that should have made me feel triggered or anything that would perhaps stir this. Maybe there's something really quite seriously wrong with me. And the hard thing to accept is that what has actually happened is that something within your unconscious mind has noticed that, has processed something, a pattern that it's perhaps had before. If you regularly feel anxious and you have anxiety attacks, then it's probably something that links into something that's happened in the past and is making you feel those things. And so if you're in this situation where you feel anxious and sometimes it flares up at what feels like random moments and you're really quite concerned that there's something seriously wrong with you, know that that is in itself a part of anxiety, and that you'll perhaps have a few more instances, but once you begin to understand that, you can enter the thought process of, oh, I'm feeling anxious right now. It's because of nothing that I've thought. It's just something in my secondary brain, my unconscious mind has noticed something that's making me feel anxious, and this will pass because it will eventually even out. And once you can begin to control those thoughts, then you can lessen the amount of times that almost primal instinct, that fight or flight, kicks in. Now, obviously, with something that causes physical symptoms, something that often paints the life that you lead, it begins to affect your thoughts. And for a lot of people, a lot of anxiety can manifest not necessarily in the actions that they take, but in the thoughts that they think. And a very common thing is automatic negative thoughts, or I prefer the term catastrophizing because it sounds more fun. But it's basically your mind leaps to one or two possible positions. It's very black or white, and there is no middle ground, and how unhealthy that can be. And so, to give you an example, and again, this comes from my personal experience, but I do think it's a good one. Is that I would often, let's say I've just been out in a cycle, or maybe I'm just living my life, and then I feel like a pain somewhere, or maybe I've had a cough for a little bit, or maybe just that feeling of unwell. And rather than think, as I think most people would, that hey, I'm just a bit unwell at the moment, this is going to pass, my brain leaps to, oh, I'm dying, or oh, I have something really seriously wrong with me. And either I'm in two states where I'm fine, or something is seriously wrong with me, and there is no middle ground. I can recall a period of years ago where I would be turning up to the doctors every other week, very apologetic, because I was conscious that I was doing this, but I couldn't stop it. And I was almost in tears talking to doctors saying, I think there's something seriously wrong with me, but also I think there's something seriously wrong in the way that I'm thinking about these things. And so that catastrophizing, that telling yourself that there's something wrong with you, or telling yourself that you should be acting a certain way, or you should be doing certain things, that in itself can be a root cause of anxiety, and it can be a manifestation of how those symptoms come to pass for you. So I hope that gives you a little insight into perhaps understanding your anxiety and what that may mean for what you do in life, and how it can affect you personally. I'm now going to move on to the toolkit and kind of little helpful things that I think will begin to help you manage this. Now, I'm hoping that nobody watching this is at this, I guess I would call it my lowest ebb, where they know that their anxiety is just so bad and they don't know how to deal with it, and they're really pulling their hair out. But if you are watching, this will help. I think for a lot of people, it might be opening their minds up to, hey, I'm potentially on a pathway to greater anxiety, and I want to cut it out, or I've learned to manage anxiety to an extent, but I want to take it that bit further. So hopefully this will all be quite helpful. I think the first thing to bear in mind is this idea of this too shall pass, that nothing lasts forever, that as human beings, we are really quite bad at maintaining single emotional states for a very long period of time. But when you're in the middle of a panic attack, and when you're in the middle of an anxiety attack, that idea can be very, very, very hard to keep in mind. And so it is really just a mantra. And at first it will not seem very useful. And I think that's great. A good commonality for all the things that help manage anxiety is the first time you try it, it won't necessarily be useful, but it's through repetition, through building in certain almost conflicting behaviors that they become useful. I remember the first time I tried meditation, it didn't automatically cure me of my anxiety, and I almost just thought it was a waste of time. But repetition is quite beneficial in this regard. So hey, if you feel like you're in a bit of an anxiety spiral and a bit of a panic attack spiral, just keep that idea in mind. This too shall pass. This will go. Nothing lasts forever. Just something that I found I was repeating to myself in the middle of panic attacks when I was really quite seriously suffering. But it is a truth that you can latch onto. And when that moment has passed, make sure that you reinforce that to yourself. Yes, this moment has passed. I got through it. And if I got through it now, I can get through it in the future. You have to be your own ally in this. You have to believe in your ability to combat this. Otherwise, you will find yourself a slave to anxiety as opposed to someone that just suffers from it. Second, then, is fighting the battles that you can fight. And certainly what I see on LinkedIn at the moment, and what I see in other avenues, is this idea of, hey, we're all in isolation at the moment, so this would be this brilliant time to self-improve ourselves and become masters at new techniques, and finally take up that hobby that you've always wanted to do, when in fact just getting through it would be a success. And for me, when I was first feeling anxious, just being able to breathe normal was a victory for me. It was a battle I could fight and win, and that was enough. I didn't need to concentrate on getting over anxiety at all, because it wasn't something that was in my power. So make sure that when you're giving yourselves things to do, that they are within your control, and that they are not so large that you get overwhelmed by setting tasks. And for some of you, it's just going to be getting through the day and being happy that you got through the day, and telling yourself at the end of the day, hey, I got through this. For others who are getting a bit more of their anxiety under control, it's going to be a case of, hey, maybe today, the next time I have a negative thought, or I'm catastrophizing things, I think things have gone really bad, I'm going to ask myself, what if things turned out all right? Or I'm going to really analyze that thought pattern and say, okay, well, if I think things are going to be bad, what's my evidence for it, and what's my evidence against it? How can you divorce yourself from the situation to begin to analyze those thought patterns? But do not ever believe someone who tells you you should be doing certain things to manage it if you feel like it's overwhelming or outside of your control. Do not give in to those thoughts. You can only be the person that pulls you out of this. With the support of others, yes, but you have to be the driver, and only you know your comfort levels, and only you know what you're capable of. But I mentioned about being alone, and finding your allies in this is going to be very important. And I know for a lot of people, the idea of broaching a topic of anxiety, or certainly mental health issues, to someone like their partner or their parents, or depending on the age of your children, your children can be very difficult. It is probably a source of greater fear almost than anxiety itself. You need to be able to talk about it in order to gather your allies. And certainly if you have close friends, there is always a worry that if you admit something like this, that it will change the relationships that you have with them. And that is true to an extent, but the fact of the matter is that your relationships have already changed because this anxiety is taking control of your life. And so you need to have allies in this. You need to have people who will listen to you, and sometimes offer advice, and sometimes just be there to say, yeah, that sucks, but I'm here for you. And if I can do anything to help, if you think of anything that I can do to help, I'm here for you. They needn't be close to you, although obviously that being close is handy because they're always there. I think I probably have an open call here, is like, if you're really, really struggling with anxiety and you don't feel like there's anyone in your immediate situation that can help, and you still need someone to offload to, I am here, and I can be that for you. I can support you through this. I may not be the best choice, and there may be better people for you, but if you just need a stopgap, that's what I'm here for. I remember for a long time with my wife, I bottled it up and I hid it from her, and then I slowly began to open up about how I struggled with it and how it affected it. And the only thing that I felt was being helped. I can recall a moment, a few kind of months after I'd started being quite a serious sufferer, where I was getting much better at opening up, but I still found myself slipping into that old habit of, no, I've got to keep this hidden from everyone. And my wife asked me what was wrong, and I just burst out into tears, and I talked about how anxious I was, and I wasn't sure where it was coming from, and she just immediately wrapped me up in a hug. She talked to me about it, and that just killed it dead. And I went from a period of high anxiety, feeling like I was about to explode almost, to being back to more my normal self. And the only difference there was that I actually spoke about my feelings. I actually talked them through with someone and externalized them. And so make sure that you find your allies. You know them, talk to them, create a lifeline, get communicating. Obviously, in the situation we are right now, face-to-face is going to be tricky, but make sure you're approaching it. If some people don't like talking, they don't like the sound of being like admitting this stuff face to face, so maybe a WhatsApp's a good option. Just messaging someone, say, hey, I'm just about to vent a little bit, but I think it's important that you know this. And then how they react is up to them. If you're in need of support, reach out to other people, because you're not going to help anyone by just trying to cut off your social ties in the thought that if you manage it, overcome it, then you can reestablish them, because that's not really how social ties work. The fourth is identifying your triggers, and everyone has different anxiety triggers. I think from a good metaphor, it is kind of like migraines. I'm a migraine sufferer, and I know my migraine triggers, and I avoid them as best as possible. Perfume's a big one for me, and I can't always ensure that people around me aren't wearing perfume, but I do try and manage them as best as possible. And with your triggers, it's going to be a case of knowing what they are and thinking around them. I know, for example, quite recently, my wife was getting very anxious with the COVID situation, and she found herself catastrophizing. She was thinking almost the world was end, and that was very hard for her to deal with. It was a great source of anxiety. It was affecting her life. And so we just said, okay, well, how about for now, you just cut out news feeds. You just, if you're religiously checking the news, just cut it out for a few weeks and see how you feel. And if you feel better, well, maybe then we know not to overwhelm you so much with the information flow. And if you want an update, I can tell you, but for now, just avoid them. And lo and behold, her anxiety just went straight down because she identified and could manage the triggers. And it varies for a longest time. And one of the root causes of my anxiety for the first time was just breathing. The idea of trying to take in a full breath and not feeling that my lungs were fully full with air. And that became my trigger. And so with something as conscious as breathing and sometimes subconscious, that became a very tricky thing to manage. But at least I knew the cause and therefore could go about beginning to fix it. Manage your inputs, number 5, which is really what is the content that you're ingesting around it and how does it affect your headspace. So I just gave the example then of my wife and the news with COVID. With other people, it's things like social media. I'll put my hand up and say that I am not on social media anymore. I've deleted my Facebook accounts. I've deleted my Instagram accounts. I've deleted my Twitter accounts, because once I became mindful of how they were making me feel, I understood that they were a negative thing in my life, and I removed them, and I'm much happier as a result. Now, this is not to say that social media is evil. For me and my personality, it was not helpful, and so I removed it. And you need to be mindful of what you're ingesting, and sometimes your inputs are the people around you, and whether they're giving you positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. So try and manage what you take in and how you process it, and be mindful of that. And that leads me to the 6th and final piece of this toolkit, which is mindfulness and meditation. Now, there are a lot of apps out there purporting to get you started. Headspace is a very popular one. There are others, Waking Up, Mindfulness, Focus app. They are good starting points. However, I think a lot of them move aside from the core point of mindfulness meditation, which is to understand what you're feeling, to analyze it, and then to use that information to really combat it. Now, if you've never done it before, guided meditation is a great way to start. I would say with all of this is don't necessarily go into it expecting it to work immediately. It takes time, 1, to build the discipline, and 2, to see it have positive impacts in what you do. But it is a great starting point. And there are some great tools out there. Like I say, if this was of interest to you, I would definitely check out something like Headspace. And I think all the major apps have a good almost starting trial. So get watching that, and that will hopefully begin to introduce you into this world. I will put my hand up and say it took me about 2 years to get it right, which is a very long period of time. I don't think I necessarily approached it in the right way, but as of where I am right now, I meditate every day. I find it incredibly useful. I find my emotions a lot more stable, and I find myself able to deal with difficult situations a lot better. And you could do an entire talk on mindfulness, and I know there have been others in this series. Some people it won't work for, and some people will really struggle with it because of the nature of their anxiety, but it's definitely something that everyone should try. So those are the 6 parts of the toolkit. This will pass. Fight the battles that you can fight. Find your allies, identify your triggers, manage your inputs, and be mindful. There are things I'm not talking about here, things like fitness and exercise, which I think are a vital role to play for some, but it's not something that's necessarily available to everyone. And so it's not something I would make as part of my core toolkit. But I hope you found that useful. I'm hoping that we have some questions that we can dive into. I know I've just been talking about this and you're probably sick of the sound of my voice by now, but let's move on to see if there are any questions.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you very, very much. That was really, really interesting and very insightful. And I think, I definitely could resonate with many things that you said there, as I'm sure others can too. We have got the chat function open, so if anybody would like to ask a question, if you don't necessarily want to ask it publicly on the group, you do have the drop-down option to just send it directly to me. Purusha Gordon as the host, and I can ask that anonymously if you like. I have got a couple of questions here from some of the discussions that we were having earlier. I think it's really interesting what you were saying about meditation and mindfulness and the breath. And we actually had a breath workshop earlier this week, and we're going to have some more as well. And I think Tracy B, who ran that session for us, she again talked very much about how the breath controls the emotions in the body. And so I think that is a really, really useful tip. And there are lots of people out there who are offering free breath workshops on a regular basis. So I think that would be a really good starting point. Conscious that a lot of the people here are probably part of a team or maybe managing a team, and it's trying to understand how can we support either people in our team that we feel perhaps are displaying behaviours or anxiety, or if indeed we're part of a team and we want to talk to our manager about the fact that we have anxiety either around COVID-19 or just in general, and feel that we would like to be supported with that. How could we perhaps approach that? What would be your kind of tips and advice there?
So I think if you're a manager, you have to be on the lookout for behaviours of anxiety, and a lot of people, it's almost something that they notice consciously at first, and they think, well, this person's maybe a bit struggling, or maybe they're a bit fearful in the office, or something's clearly not right, and the almost impetus or the natural reaction is to say, okay, what's wrong and how can I help? And that can often be a little bit confrontational to someone that suffers from anxiety. It is very difficult from a manager's point of view, because a lot of the managers that I know, and certainly when I first started managing, it was always this idea of, I need to have the answers for you so I can support you properly. However, this idea of anxiety is a bit of a journey of self-discovery, and can manifest very differently for people. Often the best thing for you as a manager is just to say to someone, hey, I have noticed things don't necessarily seem right. Maybe they are. If they are, you don't need to react to this. If they're not right, I would like to talk to you about it, or like to put you in touch with someone who you feel that you can talk to this about. And I will then be able to offer anything that you may need to help. And so you begin to put the ball back in their court to a large extent of just saying, look, this is I've noticed something. I am here for you. If you don't want to talk to me, you can talk to someone else. And then I'm here to help you however I can. And those should be honest. Those should be things that you want to do. And therefore you can begin to manage them through. And because it could be at the first instance, that person, and I know I've been here from a headspace point of view, it's just been like, I don't know what I can do. I don't know how to fix this. I feel like I'm about to explode. And sometimes it's just a case of helping them through that initial kind of panic phase. This too shall pass, and then beginning to build something up with them in terms of a support plan, or different ways of working, or how you can enable that person to function in the team properly. If you're a team member and you feel like you need to reach out, you need to. That is not easy. And I know certainly from Live Group's perspective, we now have mental health champions. I think that's a massive help. I think, one, it makes it a lot more visible, and it almost sets the organizational idea of this is okay to talk about. And it provides points of contact for people who may not want to talk to their direct manager about something, but may still want to talk about it. So if, from an organizational point of view, make sure that there are people whom people can talk to. If you are a manager, be able to offer support with being happy that you might not necessarily know what form that support may take. And if you're a sufferer, reach out however you can. And if you can't reach out in person, send an email. And if the response to that email is someone saying, hey, do you want to chat in person? You might say, and this is completely fine, say, I do really want to talk about this. I'm struggling to do it in person. Can we just have a few email exchanges, or can we do something else so I can offload this a little bit? Every little helps in this regard, and there is no immediate pathway to success. But the first step is being able to communicate however you find comfortably that you are struggling. And only once you've done that can things be set right.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think what is going to be interesting is to see the investment that corporations make into the well-being side of things once people start to return back to full-time working. And I think there are many press articles, and there's lots of discussion at the moment about everybody's mental health during this pandemic, and the isolation at home is impacting people in lots of different ways, and how anxiety is being triggered in many different ways, whether it's in relation to people fearful of contracting coronavirus, or family members, or whether there's anxiety around their securing future employment. And I think it's manifested in lots of ways. And one of the questions we've had asked is, can anxiety make you more tired?
Yes, absolutely. You can't be bundling yourself up in knots without that having quite an impact on your energy levels. It's why some people find exercise quite helpful, because it essentially burns through energy enough for them to relax for the rest of the day, and then kind of normalize their energy levels. If you are frequently tired, and obviously a frequent waking up quite tired throughout the day is a reasonably common symptom for a whole host of things. What I'd say is, if you're getting to the middle of the day, towards the end of the day, and you're just utterly drained and you felt a little bit anxious, the root cause of that is probably anxiety. It's probably all the little things you're doing. If you're kind of noticing that, hey, your leg's shaking, or you just feel like you're bundling yourself up, that's going to really hit your energy levels. And a bit of a vicious cycle here is, a lot of people, when they feel tired, they'll want to drink coffee. They'll want to have some sort of stimulant, whether it's like a Red Bull or something. And the problem can often be that sometimes, because of the nature of the energy that coffee and caffeine gives you, is it can make you feel a little bit jittery, a little bit more tightened up, and that doesn't help your anxiety. So you just end up feeling more anxious, and then you feel more drained at the end of the day. So it's noticing these kind of vicious feedback loops that can often make things feel worse. But absolutely, it can be a real drain on your energy, and it can make you feel really quite tired. And that's where it's something I mentioned at the start, how things like anxiety can link to depression, because you feel drained, you feel beat up, you feel mentally just done with things, and then you don't want to do the things that you enjoy, and so you begin to feel more anxious, more depressed, and more kind of in a hole. However, if you're mindful that loop is happening, you can begin to break it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly being isolated at home, and the social distancing measures, etc., are they're probably heightening a lot of that right now. People can't get outside, they can't get their routine has changed. They've got to coach children in terms of schoolwork at home. They've got to work. They've got so many other things to juggle and balance. It's sort of everything can become out of kilter, and I think that can definitely heighten anxiety. If you were to offer any sort of advice in terms of how we really kind of support ourselves during this time, during the time of initial lockdown, which was it was announced yesterday that we have a further 3 weeks of continued social distancing measures. And whilst we know that the coronavirus and social distancing measures are going to be some sort of form of something in place for a relatively long time, and that this doesn't finish in 3 weeks when lockdown is lifted. So anxiety levels could continue for some time, but probably are more heightened during lockdown. What sort of advice would you give to anyone out there? Sort of what kind of things can we do right now to look after ourselves at home?
So I think taking a leaf from Stoic philosophy, which is old Greek philosophy, but still very useful, is understand that there are some things within your control and some things that are not in your control. And you can't necessarily worry about the things that you can't control, and you should devote your energy to the things that you can control. And so when you're in isolation, a lot of what the damaging thoughts that can enter your mind is that your choice has been taken away from you, that you feel that the walls are closing in because you're in a house that you can never leave, and that you have had an aspect of your autonomy taken from you, and it's not a nice feeling. What you need to do is shift your headspace from, hey, here are all the things that I've lost control of, to here are the things that are still in my control, and therefore what can I do to help. I think you, Bruce, are a good example of this, because you've created this entire event series to help people, which has been something that has given you a sense of control. And control is very important to us. People want to feel like they're in control of their lives. For others, it's going to be as simple as, hey, I'm going to make my bed every morning because I can make my bed. It's within my control, and I make sure it's beautiful and pristine. And I'm going to show myself that I'm in a control of aspects of my life. I think what I'd eventually hope for that to be is, hey, I'm in this situation, but a lot of other people are in situations like this. I'm going to reach out to them, and we're going to catch up in a way that we haven't. Maybe there is something that I can do to start a social catch up, like me and for my friends, the group that I'm quite close with, is we're like every Friday we're meeting up on Discord. I know a lot of people are meeting up on Zoom, and we're just chatting. We're not necessarily setting ourselves any expectations. We're just talking to each other, and we're just enjoying each other's company. For others, they're setting up like gaming groups, they're setting up board gaming groups, they're talking, they're socializing. For others, it's just going to be as simple as a WhatsApp group where they just feel part of a conversation at all times. All of that's very important. However, what I would come back to is this idea of fighting the battles that you can fight. If you are waking up in the morning feeling very overwhelmed, and the whole COVID situation just feels like it's too much, especially if you've got a loved one that's ill with it, that can really affect your headspace in a negative way. You just don't set yourself the expectations of, oh, I should be talking to all my friends, I should be setting up all these groups, I should be picking up a hobby. Don't worry about that. Just do what you can do. And if it's something as simple as making your bed and making sure the environment that you are existing in is nice and that you like it, well, then that's good enough. It gets you through the day, and you should view that as a victory.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a few articles around that at the weekend where people were really feeling this sense of pressure that they have to go and learn something, and that they have to, they have to achieve an upskill during this time. And whilst there are actually other people that are really ready and available to do that, and there are lots of platforms out there, and we've had a few things this week where people want to kind of improve and upskill. So I think it's just recognizing that everybody's in a different space, and understanding that, and appreciating that we all need to work through this really unusual time in the best way that we can individually. Which is very, very, very true. I think it's the sense of the unknown. I think that's the most challenging part of this whole thing. And with my team, we've been talking daily, and and I've been part of some industry calls and webinars and things like that. I was part of one yesterday, and there's lots of debates going around about, will it be this, will it be that, and actually nobody really knows. And so that can really increase anxiety, because everybody's trying to solve this situation, and actually we can't. We have to almost just ride it out, and as you say, control the controllables, the things that we can control within our own environment, and that really is good enough.
Yeah, and if you're feeling centered and you want to engage in exploring the unknown, absolutely, we need people that can do that. But I think the danger is, if you are someone that's struggling with this, don't look at those people and think, I should be doing that. Fight your own battles, don't fight theirs.
Yes, absolutely. Just to say thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, Bruce. I really appreciate you giving up your time and sharing with us the toolkit. Before we go, would you recommend there are any books, podcasts, or websites, or support groups, or anything like that which people could use to really support themselves during this time?
So a few quick ones. There is a book on Amazon that's quite cheap now called 10% Happier, which is very much in this idea of someone just trying to help themselves a little bit. 10% happier. It's not necessarily the greatest amount, but it is really a good starting point. It is a good book. It is well written. I must admit, not necessarily been much of a podcast listener for anxiety, but if anyone does find any good recommendations, get them out there. And then finally, in terms of communities, obviously there is a great number of anxiety charities out there. I will say that personally, I didn't necessarily find those quite useful. What helped me was things like Reddit communities. If you're familiar with Reddit, it's basically an online communities for anything from food all the way down to anxiety. And so you can find some really good communities there and some conversations, and that will help you understand that you are not alone in this, that this is something that you can fight and win.
Brilliant, thank you. And I would add to that, we are not experts in anxiety, myself and the team at Zest, but we do have a drop-in coffee, virtual coffee shop every noon weekdays, Monday to Friday at 3:30, and everybody and anybody is welcome to join us. We never know who's going to come, but there's always going to be one or two or three of the team there, so you'll always be welcomed by us and friendly face. And there's no agenda in terms of what we talk about, it's just general chit chat. So if anybody would like to drop in and just come for a coffee, and bring your own, come for a coffee, our door is always open at 3:30 on a Monday to Friday. We've actually got quite a few more wellbeing events coming up next week, and we've got various coaching sessions and things as well. So if anybody would like to join any of those, again, you're always welcome, and please share to your friends, families, colleagues as well. These events are all free, and people like Bruce are supporting by giving up their time to help everybody out there in this situation. So do have a look at the Eventbrite page where you register for this event, and you can find out more, or go onto the Zest Global Events website, and there's a button on there which will bring up the calendar of events. If Bruce, you very kindly offer, if anybody wants to reach out to you and talk further, they can connect with you on LinkedIn, I believe. So that's Bruce Rose on LinkedIn, or your email address, which you're happy for everyone to have, is bruce.rose@livegroup.co.uk. We have recorded the session today, and we will be sharing that on our YouTube channel. So if you feel that there is anyone in your team or anyone else that you feel would benefit from listening to this talk, please, again, do feel free to share with them. So I'm going to wish everybody a happy weekend. Stay safe and stay well. And thank you very, very much for joining us this afternoon. And thank you again to Bruce. There's lots of thanks coming through on the chat from everybody here. So really, again, thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you all so much. Bye-bye. Have a lovely rest of your day.